Welcome to Church Growth Methods course. Today we're going to talk about the methods of church growth that have been used here, primarily in the continental United States. I'm going to take 10 of them. I'd like you to download the chart that you have of these, and it'll show on a kind of a graduated scale how they all fit together. But there are at least 10 identifiable schools of church growth methods. And they range from a primary focus upon spiritual, theological, and community issues to a focus upon corporate, pragmatic, or institutional issues. And again, if you look at your chart, you'll see on the left those that tend to be more kind of amorphic, mystical, spiritual, pietistic, and then on the right you're going to find the more pragmatic, more contemporary, strong focus on postmodern. In the middle, what you're going to find are models that are trying to get the best of both of those worlds, and they're looking to balance those. Now, when you look at the chart, don't think, and as we go through these 10 models, don't think that one is extremely here and the other was extremely there. They may be extreme in some practices, in some locations, but as you read the books and the literature and the material, you'll see everyone's trying to find a balance, but everyone has a particular focus that they're driving at. So I'm going to show you where they fit on the chart, why I put them on that side of the chart, how they try to balance that out, and what their primary focuses are. So if you're taking notes, you want to make sure you get these basic things down for each one. If these 10 were placed upon a chart, they would begin with those that are more concerned with community than programming on the far left, and those that are more concerned with logistic dynamics on the far right. So that's how I'm separating them on the chart. Each model of church growth interacts with both the spiritual and the physical, so don't think that one is all of something and the other one is all of something else. They all are dealing with the issues that we all feel are important in growing a church. The question is, as far as the amount of time, resources, and people, where do you put them in relationship to the different dynamics that surface? Let's deal with the first one. The most community-based model, the one I would put to the far left, would be the simple church model. It's called the simple church model. This model was formalized by the publishing of the book by Tony and Felicity Dale entitled Simple Church. This is an evangelical model that does not concern itself with structures of any type or any kind of formal liturgy. In fact, it doesn't even require a large worship service or gathering. The focus is, and it's a strong focus, upon small groups. There's no programs, they don't recommend doing programming, but only the development of deep relationships within a small social setting. This model includes the house church movement, with groups such as the Anabaptists, the Quakers, the Amish, the Plymouth Brethren, the Moravians. Many in the charismatic renewal movement are taking advantage of this intimacy and this quality of relationships and using that to build a church. The second model would be what I call the new monasticism. This made its appearance with Jonathan Wilson's book in 1998 entitled Living Faithfully in a Fragmented World. His ideas were inspired by a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I'll quote that for you. Restoration of church comes from a new type of monasticism. This is a model that emphasizes the restoring of declining communities, and it's especially diving into areas where the communities are dying. The community is that's being developed, this monastic community, is a healing agent. And through small groups and deep discipleship, growth occurs, as does deep theological reflection and deep commitments. It is a contemplative lifestyle that's being promoted, and it's encouraged as the groups work through what would be considered marginal areas of society. Number 3, the confessional movement. This is a movement within mainline denominations to return to theological orthodoxy while remaining in traditional church structures. It's an evangelical movement, but it's within some of the mainline denominations that have gone quite liberal. It actually began as a reaction to the acceptance of the homosexual lifestyle in a number of these mainline denominations, and it has expanded to include the return of Christ as the only way to heaven, the infallibility of the Bible, and that sexual activity is to be confined to a conservative view of marriage. Of the 11,000, here's a good example, of the 11,000 PCUSA churches, those are The Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, one of the most liberal Presbyterian denominations, out of their 11,000 congregations, 1,300 have already joined this movement. In other words, they're trying to move the denomination, as well as their individual congregations, back to a more conservative perspective. But this movement has overflowed from Presbyterian into United Methodist, Lutheran, and Baptist denominations. They're all involved in this type of what they would call a church renewal program. Now, one of the more popular church growth strategies is called the emergent church movement. And this is a non-denominational movement. It began under the leadership of Dr. Brian D. McLaren. He was the founding pastor of Cedar Ridge Community Church in Spencerville, Maryland. He began an association of like-minded leaders with the emergent community, or the emergent village, This group emphasizes the power of acceptance of others through understanding them and encouraging them to remain within their social structures, whether they be Buddhist or Islamist. Whatever their background is, they're encouraged to stay there after they've embraced Christianity. And this group has aligned with the socially concerned group Sojourners, which some feel are kind of a leftist-oriented Christian organization. And they have been criticized for de-emphasizing the distinctives of the Christian faith, specific doctrines that are core to the Christian faith, and also having somewhat of universalistic tendencies. Number 5. A group of pastors and theologians have surfaced, and they call themselves the New Calvinists. This group wants the postmodern church to return to evangelicalism, but the evangelicalism of the 16th century, we experienced under Calvin, the renewing of the church under Calvin. But they also want the church to remain relevant to the world. So you see how they're trying to balance out kind of what they would consider the historic Christianity of the Reformed movements that really started Protestantism, but they want to remain relevant to the needs of the world. Popular with individuals such as John Piper, Mark Driscoll, Al Mohler, Mark Deaver, C.J. Mahaney, Tim Keller, they'd all be considered part of this movement. This group is focused upon theological integrity and purity as key to church growth. Here are 5 kind of characteristics of this group. There's a return to the studying of the Puritans. Now, don't misunderstand this. This isn't simply just a Presbyterian or Reformed movement. This is crossing over virtually all denominations. Baptists, British Baptists, some Methodists, non-denominational churches. There seems to be a real strong movement at this point, returning back to the Puritans, their understanding of piety, godliness, church polity, structure, things like that. There's an special devotion or interest in Jonathan Edwards, who was perhaps the greatest theologian America has ever produced. One of his foci was the sovereignty of God. So there's a return to the Puritans. There's a love for Jonathan Edwards and his view of God's sovereignty. That sanctification is a vigorous process. That would be another one. The need to live missionally, and we'll talk more about the missional model in just a minute. To be large city oriented, because churches, populations now are moving more into urban settings. The 5th one is to hold the position that the more supernatural spiritual gifts have ceased. Now, not all of them believe that, but the majority of them see those uniquely supernatural gifts, such as prophecy, word of knowledge, healing, things like that, have ceased. Now, this group has received some criticism that some, but not all of them, are not fully Calvinistic. And what they mean by that is they haven't taken on the concept of covenantal theology. And covenantal theology is the idea that God has always been relational from Genesis through the book of Revelation. In the same way, he has established by grace a covenant relationship with his people. So the church is really a covenantal church, and theology primarily focuses around the concept of the covenants that God initiates, sovereignly initiates by grace with his people. One of the most distinctive elements of that is optional with some of these folks is the concept of infant baptism. Number 6, natural church development. This model is an attempt to perceive the church as perceive the church growth as a natural process if the leadership focuses upon essential qualities that are designed to produce healthy congregations. And he lists specifically the the number of elements necessary to be healthy. The key is natural elements that are a part of the creation order that relate to church growth. This is an attempt, and the New Calvinists are also trying to do this. They're trying to keep the traditional 16th century theological orthodoxy, which is possibly the height of orthodoxy in the church as a whole, with modern techniques. Natural church development is trying to do a similar type of thing, saying there are natural growth models for all organic things, including the church being organic, and they want to balance that as well with corporate dynamics. So you'll see them in to the right somewhat, but generally in the center of the paper that I've given you on this. So this is an attempt to balance an approach to church growth that considers both the organic and the corporate dynamics associated with developing a church as a body. Now, this church has been brought into some serious suspicion because its founder, Christian Schwartz, has been shown to be less than orthodox in his views of God. For instance, he's not a Trinitarian. So a number of churches have rejected this model. But I would suggest to you that some of his organic concepts are helpful, even though theologically he personally would not be considered by some to be an Orthodox Christian. So this approach, another criticism of this approach is that its quote natural tendencies seem to be not so natural, that they have to be cultivated. They're more of a process as you're developing that model. So you'll see them on my chart to be kind of moving to the right, more into the corporate aspect. Number 7, as the church movement moves to the right, we come up with another model called the missional church movement. Now this has been popularized by individuals such as Tim Keller, Ed Stelzer, and Mark Driscoll. You're reading Tim Keller's book for this course. The focus within this model is that few societies are Christianized. In other words, America is no longer a Christian nation. And these societies can be better understood as unevangelized groups. This requires that even in the West, and by that I mean Europe and the United States of America, Christians must live a missional lifestyle to grow their churches. In other words, you are a missionary just as Paul was a missionary in Antioch back in the first century. The gospel elements are foreign ideas to our society, and the church uses unfamiliar terms that the unchurched people just don't understand. So it's important now to return to the gospel, the essence of the message of Christianity, and that's where you see Dr. Tim Keller picking up that theme. Maybe a better way of understanding this whole thing is that many churches have mission committees. Within a traditional church structure, I've yet to find a church that doesn't have a missions committee or a missions representative, even if it's just in name or title, whether they're doing anything or not. But what the missional church movement is trying to do is not set up mission committees in churches, but missions is the one concept that ties all other concerns in the church together. This movement is to some extent a reaction against the church growth movement's pragmatism. And it's trying to get a more balanced approach in the context of historic Christian doctrine and liturgical practices. So again, you'll see the missional church movement, along with the natural church development, very close to the center of the chart, because in my mind, the missional church movement has got one of the best balances of the pragmatism and the piety in an attempt to grow churches. The orthodoxy associated with George Whitfield's revivals would be seen as an example of the foundation necessary for revival or renewal or church growth today. But added to this method would be the missionary lifestyle in the context of a post-Christian world. Number 8, I was talking about the church growth movement. Now this has received the most attention and publishes the most amount of literature in the field of church growth. You won't have any problems finding books in your library on the church growth movement. It's a methodological progression from the methods of Charles Finney's revivals. And again, Charles Finney's got kind of a mixed record amongst Orthodox Christians as to whether or not his procedures were Orthodox. This church growth movement spans denominations from Pentecostal to Baptist. I have not found a denomination that hasn't used or read or attempted to use some of the techniques here. This began in the 1950s by missionary Dr. Donald McGavran. It's attempted to study the growth and decline of churches from both a sociological, scientific perspective and a personal and spiritual perspective, while trying to keep to the scriptures wherever that is applicable. Now, this method does not solely rely upon church growth principles found in the Bible, and this has been one of their major criticisms. But they believe that if the Bible does not prohibit a principle or speak against it, then it is appropriate to use that model as a tool for church growth. For instance, telemarketing, mass media advertising. This is where the sociological studies of Donald McGavran in India have been incorporated and brought back into the United States, and they're saying, well, these are the trends of marketing, of selling products, and in kind of a crude explanation, we are going to be selling the gospel to our society. Now, this movement has been criticized as blending biblical, religious, and secular corporate notions of growth to increase the number attending on Sunday services. So as you use that material, you have to understand that there's a lot of criticism out there, and it's been growing over the numerical interest. Just because you get a crowd, does that mean that you're actually building God's kingdom? You can sell soap, but can you really sell the gospel? And the church growth movement, in some minds, has kind of overstep the sociological research and study boundaries when you're looking for trends and demographics, and then playing to those demographics. The question isn't, are those demographics not valuable or valuable? The question is, where do they fit in the scheme of the church growth development strategies that you produce? Number 9, and along with the church growth movement, comes the seeker-sensitive model. This has been used and endorsed by Bill Hybels at Willow Creek Community Church in Barrington, Illinois. It has been listed as the most influential church in America for a number of years. The Willow Creek Association is responsible for developing materials for leadership, church growth, and Christian apologetics. And this model focuses upon making all the ministries of the church user-friendly to unchurched individuals. Now, through its methods, Willow Creek has become the 3rd largest church in America. So a lot of what it's doing is attractive to the unchurched population. No one will argue that. In fact, it's the prototype megachurch, using contemporary worship dynamics and focusing on the unchurched as its primary audience. In other words, it's not seeing the church as a worshiping community of believers, but as an attractive magnet for unbelievers to hear the gospel. Its own confessed weakness is that it's been able to attract thousands to its services, but not to its discipleship programs. In other words, it's able to entertain and attract and draw large volumes of people because culturally it's connecting, but theologically and spiritually it's not connecting, and that's seen in the lack of discipleship and the depth of growth. And you'll see all that also in some of the writing of the material, that it doesn't quite go as deep as some of the other movements. I may be mistaken, but I think the Elevation Church in the Charlotte market in North Carolina is a local example of this type of church growth model. And the last one, number 10, is another very popular church growth model, and it's called the purpose-driven church. Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California, wrote the book. His church is the 8th largest church in America. Again, that in and of itself draws attention by people to see, how is he doing this. And you might want to look at that handout that I've also provided on the 100 largest churches in America, and you'll see who's on top, who's on bottom, who's in the middle. You may know some of those ministers, you may know some of those churches. I would suggest now that you go back and look at these 10 models that I've shown you or explained to you and say, well, which ones are they taking from? Or what would be the primary model that's being focused in that church? Well, in general, the purpose-driven church has been for American Baptists, or the Baptists in America, or in the Baptist traditions in America. They've been primarily using it. He's developed a paradigm for implementing the traditional purposes of the church. Again, this is a classic Baptist breakdown of the church: outreach, worship, fellowship, discipleship, and service, into logical and systematic methods. The idea here is, if you know your purposes and you stay focused on your purpose, you're going to reach your purposes. If your purposes is to grow in these 5 areas, you're going to grow in these 5 areas. Again, kind of a simple corporate concept. The way in which he spiritually applies it to the church is somewhat unique to him and has been advantageous to a number of churches. Now, although the program is straightforward, it has been criticized as a cookie-cutter model that has as many successes as failures. And you'll find that as you do your research on the purpose-driven church, that some churches have used it. They look just like Rick Warren's church in California, and they've been relatively successful with it. And then you have other churches that have miserably failed using the model. So the model in and of itself is not a guarantee of church growth. Different types of congregations have attempted to apply the purpose-driven church in various religious traditions, and with those traditions have come varying degrees of success. Now, of these 10 models, I want to back up and study 5, which I think are key or instrumental and really reveal a lot of the elements that are necessary for church growth, and we will take that up in our next talk.